Hi everyone, welcome to episode 11 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. My name is Rohit Bhargava, and each week I interview successful founders, investors, and subject matter experts on how they got started, the strategies they use to succeed, and their advice to current and future entrepreneurs. In this episode, I interview Tristan Pollock. Named by Forbes as one of their 30 under 30 for 2015, Tristan is the entrepreneur in residence and venture partner at 500 startups. He exited his first company, Social Earth, and is now the co-founder of Storefront, which has raised funding from celebrities and influencers such as Gary Vaynerchuk and Nas, with Storefront counting other influencers like Kanye West as clients of their platform. In the interview, Tristan shares his insights on building marketplaces, getting celebrity and influencer investors, what companies looking to raise funding in the US need to do, and his thoughts on opportunities in verticals such as Vice Tech. Without further ado, here is my interview with Tristan Pollock. Hi Tristan, welcome to the Startup Playbook Podcast.
Thank you, Rohit. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great having you on the show. So before we get started, I just for the people that aren't as familiar with you, can you give us a little bit of a summary of your background?
Definitely. So I grew up in Minnesota in the U.S. Not too long ago, and then split my university between Fargo and Auckland in New Zealand, and then started working on startups right after kind of spending time at a big company, Bestbuy.com, and started working my first startup right after that called Social Earth, and it was kind of a social impact media business, similar to kind of what Huffington Post Impact became. And we just saw a huge gap in like the mainstream media and what they were covering and like the solutions that could be talked about, which then that kind of after a few years and then we sold that company and we moved into working on my second startup, same co-founder, and that one was called Storefront. And so we basically that was kind of the genesis of the move to San Francisco and the West Coast from the Twin Cities, and that was kind of that where I cut my teeth in venture capital and raised a little under 10 million, and went through an accelerator and got investment through 500 startups, which is what led me over to being this entrepreneur in residence / venture partner with 500 startups today. So that's kind of the very quick shtick of it.
Sure. Well, just going back to Social Earth, what were there any sort of challenges that you faced in building a community based on content? Obviously, there's so much content that's being sort of published on a daily basis on the web. What were some of the things that you used to kind of make yourself more visible or grow an audience and a community through that?
Yeah, well, I'd say like being mission driven is one of them. It's having a business or a community that really resides around something people really care about is huge, and it'll help you build that culture and community internally as well as externally. We were pretty fortunate because we were building a business a media business and around content that had a community of extremely passionate people, because we were helping tell the stories of people solving some of the truly the hardest problems in the world, from poverty to hunger to the environment. And so anything that a social entrepreneur was working on, we were writing those stories all around the world. We had about 25 contributors, or we had about 25 countries represented from 200 contributors. And so we that kind of community naturally came together because there were people that cared a lot about fixing some of the hardships that other people or other places have to deal with.
Sure. And you mentioned that you exited the business as well. Was it a difficult decision to exit out of the business?
Journalism is a really hard business right now. Like, even people are Wall Street Journal's throwing out paywall. New York Times has had to dramatically cut their staff. But at the same time, diligent journalism that actually checks facts is becoming more and more important. Even though we have this like citizen brigade of reporters out there with cell phones, we still need to know what's actually true and what's not. And I think a great example of that is like all the fake news that's come out recently, like from like El Chapo, to just all sorts of like viral media that like had zero truth in it, but people can manipulate the system and make something look like it's real. Whether it's just planting a story or it's literally like hacking into like the NPR, like someone did when they planted a Tupac story saying he was like alive on an island somewhere. So I think that all these examples are showing like how important journalism is, and what a big effect it has, but also like how easy it is to not know what sources to trust these days. And so that was kind of the problem that we ran into with Social Alert, where we built one of the largest communities in that niche of social impact, but monetizing it and making it sustainable was not the hardest thing. Now we found some small revenue streams that worked for us, but we were kind of getting the itch. We felt like we needed like to partner with a bigger partner in order to make that work, and so that's what led to that selling the company to a larger media company who purchased Social Earth, and as well as another CSR oriented blog that was called Just Means. So I think we kind of looked at it as a way to like give it more length, and more a larger reach by bringing these three companies together.
Sure. In terms of the community that you built, outside of putting out the content and being very mission driven, were there any particular strategies that you used to grow and engage your community over time?
Yeah, so I mean, naturally, I believe pretty strongly in content and like thought leadership. At the time, it was like, all right, like there's all these stories that need to be told that aren't really being told, or people don't have a platform for that. So we kind of had a private community. We built a private community for our contributors, which helped scale onboarding and also gave people a chance to be able to talk to each other. We could put out story ideas that people could pick up, things like that. But really, like a lot of it was just like writing really good quality stuff that was like providing resources for people at nonprofits or social enterprises, that they could take and that were super valuable. And naturally, as we kind of set that tone, and more people wanted to contribute and like share their own resources, whether through their writing or through commenting or through some of our other channels like on Facebook or Twitter. So there was definitely a very strong subset of social entrepreneurship people on Twitter, and that was like a super useful tool when Twitter launched, or kind of around the same time.
Sure. So I guess transitioning out of Social Earth and exiting the business, what was kind of the genesis of Storefront getting started? How did the concept come to you, and what was there a break in between Social Earth and Storefront as well for you?
A very short one. We might have had probably like 3 months, and then we were already like talking about what would be Storefront under a different name. And at the time, like we probably like, it was almost 3 years on the dot since starting the first startup, which we bootstrapped, and didn't take any funding or do anything like that. And then what we started to do was walk the streets and talk about this idea of what Storefront would be, talking to like our friends and family about running retail stores. And my parents were artists and had always brought me to gallery openings and art fairs and all these like temporal retail experiences, and we were just like seeing this huge shift in retail being about the experience and not just for commodity products. And I saw that firsthand working with Best Buy. They did not focus enough on BestBuy.com, and it really suffered because of that, because like companies like Amazon were doing everything about like online purchasing and sending the stuff as fast and as easy as possible to people's front doors. And Best Buy, focused a lot on the service business and being in the store, which is kind of having these big thousands and thousands of foot stores, 10,000 foot stores, is like really like a kind of a dying breed, because people want to have their items and their services come to them. And so like we just started thinking about this idea and like relating it to our past experience, and like also the desire, to fill these 1 in 10 stores that are vacant across the US with really creative, really interesting people and experiences that we thought should be, everyone should know about, but they just weren't getting the same exposure offline or in cities as they could get online. And we thought that wasn't like, we don't want to live in uninspiring cities that don't give us access to the most creative people living in them.
Mm. True. So, with the concept that you had and going out and talking to retailers and things like that, what was the next step for you in building out that essentially that marketplace?
So after we like walk the streets and like talk to space owners and like sign people up, we started focusing on, all right, like now we have stores, we know people are like interested in doing this, like the trends are there. A lot of people are talking about pop-up shops in the news, and like more companies are testing them and trying them, and some have been doing this for years. So we were like, okay, and the next step was like we basically threw up a landing page and said, hey, if you're looking for pop-up space, like, and give us your email, give us your email in your city, and get on kind of almost like a pre-order list. And so we kind of did that as like the first iteration of the site, then slowly moving into an MVP format that became kind of this marketplace that was, similar in essence to Airbnb, but instead of for short-term residential, it was for short-term retail. And from there, like we were like, my co-founder's like, hey, we need to go to San Francisco. We need to like go to Silicon Valley. We need to get out there and get into the community there, because that's where like all this startup stuff is happening. And so that was kind of like why we looked at AngelPad, and then after it got accepted into the AngelPad program, and so that's like how kind of the next stage, I guess, of the company was then in San Francisco.
Sure. So for people that aren't too familiar with AngelPad, can you tell us a little bit about the program?
Yeah. So the funny part of the story is that we had very, very limited notice of when we got in. So we, when we got accepted into AngelPad, we had maybe 3-day notice, and we were to move out, from Minnesota to San Francisco. And so we moved out there. We didn't have anywhere to stay, and we didn't really know anyone. And so we ended up finally, like, after like a week of like sleeping on someone like a friend's brother's floor, we found like this, except for everyone who doesn't know, it's extremely hard to find space to live as well in San Francisco. It's almost like Manhattan, and so there's like a lot of, it's back to kind of like a supply and demand issue. There's a lot of demand, a lot of people moving there for jobs, and very limited supply. And so like we were like trying to find a place. We ended up living with two other founders in the program. So like four guys, 4 founders in this 1-bedroom apartment with no furniture for like the next 3 months. So that was like our like kind of slumlord startup experience in San Francisco, which I think everyone has in the beginning. And we basically like to look at like the AngelPad program. Like it was a 10-week program. We got into it in October, got out in like early November, and it's a lot smaller than other programs. It's definitely like a boutique incubator. Some companies were maybe closer to the acceleration stage, but we were definitely like still at incubation stage as far as like our level of traction of the business. We had this very basic MVP, and we and they also only like bring in about 12 companies every time. So it's small boutique. They have a co-working space where you all work out of, which I think is pretty valuable. 500 does this as well with bigger classes. But I think the co-working space is hugely undervalued. YC doesn't do a co-working space. And I think you miss the community and like the support network that you get from having a space, living, kind of working and living around same people for the next 4 months. So I think that's actually really valuable. And now since AngelPad has moved out to New York, but they've had some really big wins in like the early classes. We were at AngelPad 5. But up in the first 5 classes, there were a lot of wins. Like MoPub sold to Twitter for like $350 million. Postmates came out of AngelPad like right before us. Vungle, another mobile ad network, and another really great marketplaces, B2B marketplaces like Storefront, like UpCounsel for attorneys, and Connect for small SMB procurement. So there's been they're really great at like picking, I think, the good mix of like good founders, good market, good business. So I think that's kind of like some of the differentiating of AngelPad.
Sure. I mean, obviously, you're quite heavily involved with accelerator program through 500 Startups is an accelerator program as well as a venture fund. But your experience of going through an incubator program, how valuable do you think it was for you guys to go through that? Aside from the connections and the having a co-working space that you were working with other startups that were there at the same time.
Oh, incredibly valuable. I mean, some of the like the other founders that I went through AngelPad with are like some of my best friends. Like you might be able to hear my voice. My voice is a notch deeper than usual because I actually was just at a bachelor party in Cabo. But like out of like the 10 people there, half of them were from that AngelPad class.
Wow.
So that shows like the power of like how deep like some of those relationships can go. Like I think like it goes very deep. And like they've been my support network and some of my closest friends for the last 4 years since moving up here and not really knowing anyone.
Sure. So going back slightly to Storefront, you had I saw online that you have got an investment from a bunch of really big influencers, and influencers have also used your service. So people like Gary Vaynerchuk, Kanye West, if I'm not mistaken. How did that come about?
Kanye West came. His team came to us just organically. They did pop-ups when he did the Yeezus tour, and they did like week-long pop-ups in every city. And they found us. They found a space they liked in New York, and then they booked it right through the site. And so that was a huge win for us, and also showing us like we're doing something right in the marketing side, and like we're able to get out content. We built up really great content in SEO. We did a lot of things along those lines to really like double down on being the thought leader in the space, the go-to brand for these sorts of experiences. Mm-hmm. And then like Gary Vee and like some of the other people that came on board, like Queensbridge, which is Nas and Anthony Sala, and like these guys, I think they saw like the potential of like retail space being underutilized, and not only that, but like most like people in entertainment are also working on other ventures, and a lot of those could play really well in retail. So like you have Honest Company, you have with like Jessica Alba, you have like Kanye West, Yeezus brand, you have like all these like kind of fashion brands, like liquor brands, perfume and cologne. And so like a lot of people in entertainment got this, and so we spent a decent amount of time between LA and New York, which were also two of our biggest markets, and then that's kind of how that came about.
Sure. Did you reach out to them directly? Did you get connected to them through sort of accelerator programs or your networks, or did it kind of, apart from Kanye West, did that kind of organically again sort of happen and they sort of came out to you?
I'd say so. When we do Series A investment, I'd say that's usually when like entertainment kind of LA based investors start to get more involved. I'd say like it seems to me that they do often a lot more A investments than seed, because they're not high frequency investors. Usually they're kind of coming in at a stage where they think the business is pretty rounded out, and there's smart investors also getting in the round. So when Spark put in led our Series A, that's when Queensbridge and Gary Vee got involved.
Sure. So I guess the next part of your journey was being involved with 500 startups as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you currently do over there?
Yeah, so at 500, I'm this like EIR venture partner, which means I do some seed deals, I do some accelerator deals, I coach usually 6 or 7 companies in each of the San Francisco accelerators. So I've been with them about a year, and so I've done about 3 batches, full batches, batch 12, batch 14, batch 16. Now we're on batch 18, so I'm just starting my 4th. And so I'll spend time doing that, and also spend time flying, jetting around and like helping us. We have like one of the biggest networks, probably for any like accelerator or venture fund in the world, because we've spent so much time visiting other ecosystems and empowering entrepreneurs all over the world. So that then probably the other part of my time is kind of flying around and speaking at tech conferences and doing mentorship and things like that to try to help these other ecosystems learn from like the everything that's happening in Silicon Valley and San Francisco.
Sure. How did you find the transition from being an entrepreneur yourself and looking for investment to now being on the other side of the table and looking for investment opportunities?
Yeah, it's interesting. I like to say probably like I've raised like $10 million, and I've now like invested $10 million, and so it's like kind of like an interesting juxtaposition, but on the both sides of the table thing. I'm definitely getting the itch to build. Like I'm kind of like keeping my eyes open for opportunities and ideas and things that are interesting me. But also I think it's interesting, definitely to be a good founder, you have to be very like perceptive on what other people need. It's kind of like, it's almost like business development or sales when you're like fundraising. You need to know like what the person on the other side of the table is thinking and what they need to show in order, what their goals are to accomplish when it comes down to this sort of stuff. So I think I've learned a lot, and I think you learn a lot also as an investor working with an accelerator, because working with an accelerator, you don't only make an investment into an early stage company, you also see them for the next 4 or 5 months. At least with the 500 program. So you actually get a really good sense of like why certain things work and why they don't. And then everyone talks about pattern recognition. So you start to see these patterns of founder, of like mix of founders and stage of the business and market, and like what worked well and what didn't, and like who, which these co-founders broke up and these ones didn't. And you start to like really see that through the process, but you get to see it like every day, versus like, putting in an investment, like a lot of seed investors, and then maybe like hearing, getting updates, like getting only the positive updates every like few months.
So can you share some of those learnings that you've made without necessarily giving away your secret sauce as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, as far as like accelerator investing, or
yeah, both accelerator investing and investing in general.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there is. I mean, this is like something that like Dave McClure will say, but like there isn't really that much of a secret sauce. Like it's really like it just takes it takes time and practice, like anything. Uh, I don't know how good of an investor I am because I've only been doing this for like a couple years. So, if I mean, I can look and say, hey, look, this company, these are my companies that have raised their seed round. These are the companies that raised a Series A. These are the ones that are profitable. But like at the end of the day, the cycles are so long. Even 500 startups is only 6 years old, and we're probably going to need to look at like the 7, 8, 9 years to actually see like what are we bringing back like full returns. We just had Twilio IPO recently, and we've had some big wins recently, but I think there is just the cycles. You have to see in that 5 to 10 year range really what happens with the funds. So still a lot. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at all. I think there's still a lot to learn, but I think the things you learn is like you just start to see dynamics with with founders, with the types of businesses. Like I said, it's just this matter of like kind of like you start to like understand like, hey, like this will work, this won't. I mean, overall, I think probably maybe the biggest takeaway is that usually if you've been in this before, like you've had startups before, you've probably built a team before, maybe you've had some sort of exit before, then that sort of experience is really valuable. And so if you have founders that have had that experience before and it was like legitimate experience and they saw a startup go through the full life cycle, then that's probably like maybe one of the biggest indicators over like stage and traction and market and all these other things. It's like the fact that like someone actually has had like these success before, so it's someone you want, it's worth taking a bet on.
Sure. And so obviously 500 startups as more of a venture fund. You invest in startups around the world, from what I understand. Are you looking for businesses that are primarily looking to start setting up and expand in the US, or are you looking for people in those markets to dominate their own market first and are betting on them winning their local space?
Yeah, so that's like that can be the hard part because like a lot of companies are not getting investment, that are operating outside the U.S. They're not really getting investment in the U.S., even though that's where most of the capital is for venture. So I think what you see is companies that are operating in the U.S. Investors invest in things they understand. So if I have a fintech background, I'm investing in fintech, and I'm going to be more scrutinizing on it. But I'll probably invest in those things that when it does make sense, and they're operating in the U.S. where if they're doing fintech in Brazil, maybe I have no clue what exactly the regulations are. Is this a stable market right now? Who knows? So I think generally you see like that kind of breakdown. For us, like, we have about 15 micro funds around the globe, and like those are the funds usually like sourcing and investing in the countries that they're based or the regions that they're based in. For us, we also use the accelerator to help companies. Usually like some 30 to 50% of every accelerator is international companies or founders that are operating in other places or looking to expand into the U.S. market or looking to expand globally. And so we take a pretty strong approach to diversity, investing in, not just international founders, but founders of all shapes, colors, sizes, sexes. So that's something that we definitely take a huge pride on, why we have expanded so globally and look at helping and supporting the founders ecosystems all over the place.
Sure. Are there any particular sort of industries or verticals that you yourself or 500 startups are really excited by at the moment?
So we have quite a few like bot AI companies. I think just like it's an evolving technology. It's not, we're obviously a little bit ways off of true AI, but I think people are recognizing messaging and automation as the way that business will be done. So applying that to like old, unsexy problems is pretty interesting. I know in Australia everyone's really excited by mining, or at least, and so I think like there's a lot of things that are like like I've seen like applications. We just had a couple companies that took drones and used them for construction, and also for like insurance and roof inspections. But why not use them for mining? Why not use them for agriculture? And so I think like a lot of that stuff's really exciting, and that's part of my post I wrote on Medium about Australia is like frontier tech is a huge opportunity, not just in Australia but in startup ecosystems around the world, where you have a chance to create friendlier regulations so you can be the testing bed and maybe the genesis of some of these new technologies.
Sure, I'll make sure that I link up the your article in our show notes as well. But speaking of Australia and some of the other ecosystems that you visited, what are your thoughts on the other ecosystems outside of the US specifically, and how do they compare to what you've seen in your local market?
Yeah, I'd say like Silicon Valley got like a 40-year head start, and so you have most of these other ecosystems, Australia or New Zealand or Serbia. It's usually there's like kind of core competencies in each of those depending on like the background. Like Eastern Europe has like a lot of like hardware engineers, so like people kind of try to solve hardware problems. Australia has a lot of business and financial people, so they think about things in like from like this business, product, brand, financial approach. And so like you kind of have like different talent, these subsets of talent, the talent pool. And then you also have like, there's always like some sort of lack of capital. And it's usually somewhere in the early stage, like capital, between like 500K and 2 million or something. Maybe there's like later stage, like you'll be able to raise money, for an A or a B or a C, probably outside the US potentially, or from very select people if you make it that far. But then there's kind of like this gap between like a little bit of angel money and like getting to like Series A. So I think, or even on to Series B sometimes. So I think like that kind of gap is what like we're trying to come in and help close. And through our connecting entrepreneurs we invest into our network and the networks in San Francisco, Silicon Valley, but also like just being able to make those investments and give people a running head start so that they can actually do what they're trying to accomplish. So I say capital, talent, the talent base, and that's why like a lot of like investors, if they're investing into an A or a B round, they'll probably be like, hey, like we actually want you to be, in San Francisco, or we want you to be in this larger city because we want to make sure that you can. We're investing in you to be a $1 billion business. We want to see you make, hundreds of millions of dollars, and we want and you need to be able to support that with the resources and talent and also downstream funding and capital. So which isn't globally accessible at the moment. Like usually there does need to be operations or an office in the US to kind of get that investment from someone in California.
Sure. So for startups that are based outside of the US and are looking to raise money from San Francisco or elsewhere in the US, does traction in their country translate to traction in the US? So would US investors be excited by significant amounts of traction that people are getting in their local markets?
I mean, it could be interesting. It definitely can be interesting, I think, but they're usually like, okay, again, like they don't know that local market per se, so they may be like, okay, that sounds like really interesting. For 500, that's great. Like we're like, oh, well, we've done a bunch there, and if the founder's like, hey, we want to like keep expanding and like get into the U.S. or like we want to break into the U.S. market, It's like, great, well, okay, like, we can help you with that. We also, we definitely bring in companies that are just going to stay in their market and like keep working in their market, because like I said, we want to invest in the best entrepreneurs no matter where they are. And so we'll do some of that, but I'd say like most of the time, like it's going to be a struggle. Like if you're operating in South Africa, and then you're probably going to need to raise money in South Africa or in Africa, or maybe 500, but it's going to be hard to raise in the US unless you like have like something that's you have like a platform that is already globally, you're selling globally, and globally accessible.
Sure. So for a startup that's looking to expand into the US, and they've had significant amounts of traction, say Australia or somewhere in Asia, is it more beneficial for them to have some sort of testing or a little bit of traction in the US market as well for them to get investment?
Yeah, I think you're gonna have to, most of the time you're gonna have, if you're like focused in a certain geography, currently that's not the US, you'll have to like, probably have either you have to really kill it in what you're doing, where you're doing it, have like a platform that is like globally accessible, so it doesn't matter like where you are, you're just selling like an online service or SaaS platform or something. That could be one angle, or like you have to have US customers and show that growth in the US as well.
Sure. And finally, before I'm mindful of your time, before we head off, applications are open for the next batch of 500 startups. What is it that you're sort of looking for?
Yeah, so for this next batch, batch 19, that's going to be in Mountain View. I think they're running a couple tracks. I think they kind of have they're looking at B2B companies. They're looking at like health and beauty, and they look at a lot of like e-commerce and fashion. Now that said, I would encourage like any company that's interested in learning about 500 or going through the process to apply. We're pretty agnostic when it comes to technology. Like we were looking at like internet digital businesses. We do some hardware, but it's less likely. But if you're working on any sort of online business, like that's that could scale. Like we're just looking at those high growth businesses that can scale up.
Sure. And just quickly, I know that you're interested in Vice Tech as well. Can you you recently wrote an article about that as well. Can you kind of briefly share what Vice Tech is and what you see sort of the potential?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, to me, like the subject line of Vice Tech is the sex, drugs, and rock and roll of Silicon Valley. The body copy is it's technology products that are helping people have better experiences and enjoy life. And I think like the more experiences that you have, then the more you are going to be more open-minded and less judgmental, and the better society we create. And so I think like that's kind of the underlying message there. You look at like examples of what I would clarify as a Vice Tech company. I think like there's going to be huge advancements in sex tech and like sex education and just like the future of intimacy. And there's interesting, there's like an app that's called Pillow that's kind of like headspace for intimacy between couples, and there's another platform that's called OMGYes that's like run by women for women, and it's about sex education because everyone was learning their sex education from porn, which isn't actually realistic. And then you have like cannabis companies and like how that can, there's this huge medicinal property of cannabis, but it's also something people use to have fun and relax. And so like I think like with all this technology, the Silicon Valley is really like helping empower acceptance and open-mindedness to using technology through technology for things that people generally like weren't like VC funds weren't investing in before. And I think we're starting to see that open up a little bit more, where they're getting there. A lot aren't still, but they're getting more comfortable in making these investments. And I think it's something that will really help like human society.
Absolutely. And for people that want to find out more about you, get in touch or follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I'd say go to my website, tristanpollock.com, or tweet at me at writerpollock.
Perfect. Again, I'll make sure that all of the links are in the show notes. Tristan, thank you so much for your time and for your insights.
My pleasure, Rohit. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to episode 11 of the Startup Playbook Podcast. You can find the show notes of my interview with Tristan, along with a curated list of tools and resources for startup founders at startupplaybook.co. As always, you can join the conversation through our Twitter account. The handle is @PlaybookStartup. Next week, I interview Adir Schiffman, an incredible entrepreneur who founded and sold 3 different businesses before becoming the chairman of Catapult Sports, the world leader in wearable athlete analytics for elite sport. Catapult Sports provides their hardware and software to the major teams in the AFL, EPL, NFL, and the NBA. Catapult Sports IPO'd in December 2014, and since then has gone on to acquire 3 different companies, cementing their position as the world leader in the industry. In the interview, Adir shares how to find your strengths, the 3 skills that every startup needs, how to sell into a relationships-based industry, changing business models, and getting investment from Mark Cuban. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with our latest episodes. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you at episode 12 next week.